was the eve of my 30th birthday. I was at home with my children. This is not how I was supposed to be seeing out my 20s. I thought I would have traveled the world by now. I thought I'd be a free spirit. I would have made a great poet, an artist, a lover. But I chose to be a mother first. Sure, a lot of women are mothers by the time they reach 30, but this was not what I had imagined for myself when I was young. When I was a freshman in high school, most of my friends were high school dropouts, a tight crew of wannabe gang members and their groupie high school girls. On summer nights, I would typically be at a party, drinking and smoking around a bonfire in the clearing of the woods, just south of Chicago with my friends. On one of those nights, there was someone new in the crowd. He was quiet and handsome, but had a hard look to him, like his 19 years on this earth was filled with more than most experienced by this age. So as he sat there wearing a beater tank with an old English 40 in one hand and a cigarette in another, I fell harder and faster than I ever thought I could. He wasn't at all the kind of guy you would want to bring home to meet your parents, but that was the exact quality I liked in most guys. He was 19. I was 14. So began our relationship, and despite each of our rebellious, hot-tempered natures, we managed to keep it going strong throughout the year. I continued my relentless partying throughout my freshman year, but I never let it get in the way of my 4.0 grades. My tenacity was both my strength and weakness. I had the ability to stay focused and do well with school and sports, all while I fought so hard to be free of all confines and supervision and rules. I was moving forward in life despite the choices I made when supervision wasn't around. By my sophomore year, my parents had decided to send me to the Catholic high school a few towns over as an attempt at tearing me away from the life I was making for myself. The late night partying continued, and I was spending all my time with my boyfriend, who had no job, high school diploma, or really any future. And for the first time in my rebellious teenage life, I didn't disagree with them. I too felt I needed a change. I knew I had been going too fast, too hard, too soon. That summer before I was to start in my new school, my mom, my sister, and I went back to school shopping. It was on this single shopping spree that I was forced to bring all my past and present choices to a shrieking halt. I couldn't pick a single thing out while we shopped. This was not like me. I had known, however, for several weeks what was really ahead of me. And it wasn't until we were in the middle of Macy's that I found myself overcome with the burden I'd been carrying. I had no control over my words. So there I was in the middle of the junior section when I told my mom I was pregnant. The drive home, I had never been so quiet in my life, all while being berated by my mother and sister. I, the one who always had something to say, something to stand up for, had no words. I could never go back to that girl just a few hours earlier that was back to school shopping. I didn't go to Catholic school that year. When we arrived home, I couldn't bear to see the disappointment from my dad when my mom would tell him my news, so I left. I had nowhere to go, so I walked. Not for clarity, but because walking was all that I could do. I wasn't even old enough for a driver's license yet to make my getaway in a car. I was 15, and I would soon be a mother. By the time I'd come around to telling my mom I was pregnant, I'd already known for almost a month. I had hid the positive pregnancy test in the corner of my closet and would frequently return to it to see if it had changed, like a magic 8-ball that would eventually give me the answer I'd hoped for. I never felt so alone. I'm not sure where I got the strength from or how some inner part of my character managed to surface, but I somehow came to the conclusion that I had to make this right. I got a job. I no longer could depend on my parents. I had to be responsible, not just for myself, but for the baby I was now carrying. I had to leave my past life behind. This show of responsibility, however, did not spare me from having to endure months of disappointment seeping from my family. They were certain any chance I had to make something of my life was over. My mom told me I would never be more than a grocery store clerk if I became a teenage mom. My parents brought me to meet with our priest, and had him tell me I would be forgiven if I had an abortion. All I needed to do was confess my sins. I resisted. I was forced to sit through meetings with adoption agencies that attempted to psychoanalyze me and convince me that the only choice I had was to give up my unborn child for adoption. I never gave in. Then, 8 months later, over my spring break, my sophomore year in high school, while my friends were out partying in the cornfields, I had my son. I managed to finish high school while continuing to support my son and myself, but I never fully let go of my rebellious nature. On nights he would spend with his dad, or if my family was feeling generous and would babysit, I would go right back to partying and staying out all night. But I would always return to my life as a single mother and oftentimes miss out on the high school events and life experiences my friends remained a part of. I moved into the city to go to college, and most of the time I kept my shit together. Although, on the occasions I was able to be a single girl again, I would quickly return to my pre-baby roots and hit the clubs and party until the sun came up. I didn't have time or the desire really for a boyfriend between my son and my schoolwork, so I would oftentimes end my nights with random one-night stands and find my way back to my apartment when I sobered up. I would wash the night off, pick up my son, and once again go back to being a mother. When I graduated, I decided to join the Navy, and I commissioned as an officer in the Nurse Corps. The military was never something I'd planned for myself, but joining the Navy seemed at the time like the only way for me to move forward and leave the rest of my past behind. Plus, now I could travel. I was stationed in San Diego. I worked the night shift mostly, opposite from my friend Stella, who was also a single mother in the Navy, and we would trade off taking care of our kids. It was exhausting. It was through Stella that I met my husband, a Marine, and quickly we grew our family from 3 to 6. I spent 6 years in the Navy before returning to school for my master's. I was responsible and stable and had grown up so fast, and this was how I found myself on the eve of my 30th birthday. I was unrecognizable to my 15-year-old self. Months later, my son would be turning 15. His birthday had always been bittersweet for me. On one hand, he's one of the greatest loves of my life. On the other hand, his birthday's a reminder of the child I lost in myself, however many years had passed. His 15th birthday was especially torturous for me. He was the age I was when I was pregnant with him. I'd been a mother half my life. For his birthday, I took him to San Francisco for the weekend, just the two of us. I'd visited there a year before on what was my first real trip away with no kids or responsibility since I myself was a kid. And for a moment during that time, I was able to get a glimpse into what my life could have been if I had nobody to take care of but myself. I wanted to go back there and find that feeling again, and I wanted to give him a chance to maybe see into his future as well, a future that could be filled with travel and exploration and new experiences. I could so clearly see the potential for the life he still had ahead of him, a life I gave up to have him. I loved every minute spending time with him on our trip, but I couldn't stop thinking about how young he was, how young I was. But he was right where he was supposed to be at 15. He was doing well on the wrestling team and spent most of his free time skating and riding his BMX bike with friends, or spending time with his girlfriend watching movies on the couch. My thoughts bounced from feelings of despair to pride. I did this. I gave him this life that allowed him these opportunities he would have ahead of him. But as we celebrated his 15th birthday on the streets of San Francisco, I couldn't help but dip back into thinking about what I gave up. I will never get back the time I could have had to live my life before I became a mom. There'd always been a piece of me that wished I had that. Then, the other day, he texted me, "I miss you, Mama." We don't see as much of each other now that he's a freshman in college. He came home early that day just to give me a hug. Now, when I look at the 18-year-old from Illinois that I would have been, I wouldn't have traveled or been an artist. I know my tendencies. I would have been that grocery store clerk. I would have continued the self-destruction. It's because of Omar I actually did live my life the way it was supposed to be.
VAMP first timer, Michelle Kerouac.